Fantastic, thank you very much. Just to confirm, can everybody see my screen so far?
So we can see your slides, but not in presentation mode, Marcus.
Good. I'll work it in there. Good morning, and thank you for everybody so far. It's been a very useful morning so far, so thanks very much. A brief introduction from myself. I'm Marcus Chambers. I'm a digital process lead for Skanska, but my role mainly for today is the chair of a BIM for Water group, which is our owner-operator group. And I'm going to be running through some of the stuff that we're kind of doing to help us understand the CDE, which will link to our information requirements in general. A bit of background with the owner-operator group. So we've got a number of members from varying clients. I've got a list there, and we've got more than one representative for most of the organisations we're looking at. We try to meet on a quarterly basis and have a number of kind of working groups or working streams going on in the background. Our purpose is to enable owner-operators to maximise value through digital transformation and better information management. And obviously that's owner-operators within the water sector. We've got an operating model which was agreed a couple of months back, which is to work with other subject matter experts. So within BIM for Water, we've got a 4D task group, we've got some other specialists, but we also know there's going to be value to link with Survey for BIM, with the HSE, better with most people on this call as well. We aim to promote and share best practice that we develop. We're going to identify common programs of work, basically to make sure that whatever we focus on will deliver the most value across the sector. We're going to connect with a specialist group within BIM for Water to make sure that our communications get to a wider audience and get our messages heard and help with the change process. We're going to create a lot of content. We're going to identify and deliver quick wins and again celebrate and communicate so that people understand the message. And we're going to share everything between the various owner operators. So the list of people engaged in this group, they don't need to work specifically as part of this group. They will be collaborating in the background to a common good. Excuse me. There'll always be encouragement to align with the relevant standards, namely 19650, with a key focus on information requirements. There's a commitment within the group for open sharing. A few years ago, we developed, I suppose, BIM guidance specific for the water industry. That needs a bit of a refresh. The initial document was very much, I suppose, I know there's been talk about level 2, but it was very much kind of enabling the delivery side, and we're going to have a bit of a refresh to look at how we can optimise or I suppose realise maximum value from that good data once it's been handed over. And really the owner-operator group reports into the BIM for Water steering group, so we'll always be able to get a bit of direction from the steering group, and they'll always have good insight into what we're up to. With that as our operating model, we've got a very high level plan for 2020. Things have obviously slowed down due to COVID. People's availability and things are a bit trickier at the moment, so we're not pushing too hard. But high level, we want to develop plans with a few external subject matter experts. So again, we've identified HSE, an internal BIM for Water 4D task group, and Survey for BIM. They're the three that we've identified that will provide the, I suppose, the quickest value. The bit that we're going to go into today is understanding the CDE. So it's been identified that people's understanding of a CDE varies, and we want to collectively come up with something that will, I suppose, communicate what a CDE is and how that will inform the information requirements, or work hand in hand with the information requirements. And as I said a minute ago on the previous slide, we will be updating our guidance document, which will have a key focus on post-handover and operational benefits. And we've identified WINEP as a programme of work which is across the whole UK. So we're going to identify what does good look like there, and then try to hit the whole industry with that. So without further ado, coming into the CDE. Now, again, this is very much work in progress. What we are trying to communicate here is that for the water sector, at the very least, the common data environment isn't a single platform. It's not a off-the-shelf product. It is made up of your asset information model and your project information models. And obviously there will be due consideration for the WIP shared published archive, and some of those may sit in project information model or asset information model, or both. I've made my computer's frozen. Can everybody still hear me?
Yep, still hear you.
Brilliant. If only my computer would catch up with me. I love my home broadband. Bear with me 1 second.
If it doesn't work, let me know. I can probably try and share what I have through my laptop if need be. Oh, there you go.
No, we're okay, so I suppose I need to jump in that I've made quite a big assumption at the front end of this, and that is that owner operators understand their business data and system architecture, which I suppose links into their OIR, AIR, and IT. So business architecture, what is the business trying to achieve and how is it structured to achieve this? Data architecture, so what data enables the business to achieve its goals, and making sure we've got the right data quality and governance in place to ensure that the data is trusted and fit for purpose. And system solution, or our IT, is the physical implementation of technology to facilitate the data architecture to meet the goals identified in the business architecture. Assuming that all of that is covered. Within the water sector, we can, it's a very high level assumption again, but we can probably break down some of the business architecture to cost, carbon, maintenance, content management, there'll be graphical data. It's all the typical types of data that the water industry work with, and the ones on this slide, to name but a few. Historically, most of our owner operators will have bespoke systems to manage the type of data that we're working with here. It's not a single system. So looking at feeding information from the asset information model to the project information model, and this is a really simplistic overview, and I'd welcome more questions at the end to delve into the detail, as it's also a work in progress. So we're really just trying to collectively, as a group, ask some of those plain language questions with regard to the CDE. So we know information sits within the asset world. We know that for our delivery teams, they will require access to some of that information. So high level question, what information do the deliverable team need? What system is the deliverable team using? And how is the information shared from the asset world into the project world? Again, it may be very industry specific, but there may be situations where the project information model is an extension to the asset information model. So it's basically the client sharing their environment for the project or the delivery teams to work in. Again, it's all very well and good. We just need due consideration again for the cybersecurity, the user access, workflows, status, suitability, and again with that link into the your WIP, shared, published, and archived. So your typical workflows. Where the delivery team is to work on their own systems and tools, how is that information to be released to them? You know, I suppose traditionally for the asset world to the delivery world, it's probably been more a case of releasing packages, and we've not released data as work in progress for a project to then update, but there is always scope for that to be the case. When it comes to publishing information from the delivery world to the asset world, again, I forgot to mention this for the previous slide, but it's the questions that relate to each of the main data streams or each of the main business functions. So if we're looking at cost, you know, how is that cost? Or what cost is required? When's it required? How's it required? What checking and approval processes are in place? What validation is in place? On to the next one. It's carbon, right? The same questions for carbon, the same questions for graphical data, the same questions for operational data. And what we're doing to again, next time we meet, we'll be pulling together, we'll be asking these questions, and we'll be putting them in a template form so that it's common for everybody. So then when we've got, we'll hopefully have a matrix that can be shared with supply chain, and it will be as clear and concise and no mixed messages, or it won't require a lot of deciphering from the previous contract that a supplier had. It'll all be consistent, even if it's different systems. It'll all make sense and look very familiar. Obviously, there's the same considerations when we're looking at the repair and maintenance world. You know, they will need access to information. They will potentially require the ability to update that information. And we've just got a few key questions there. And the whole logic here is that we're trying to look at the whole life cycle of these assets, not just a project by project. So where a delivery team have created great content of sorts, how can a maintenance guy actually update that? Or even if it's just a case of red line markup or adding comments to a document, is that possible, or is it yet another version? And when you go in the future to look at the single source of information, you realise there isn't one, because there's a project version, there's an operational version, and there's a maintenance version, and it all just gets a little bit blurred. So we're trying to say, look, there will be one version, and we need to understand what that looks like through the life cycle and what the process is, how it gets from one environment to the next through the WIP, shared, published, and archived process. And I've rallied through that quite quickly, mainly because it's work in progress. The purpose of this one is really to let you guys know that this is the approach that we're taking. As BIM for Water, we've got a number of focus groups. So the owner-operator group being just one of those. We've got another group that's looking at kind of standard data, product data templates. We've got another group that's working with Sarah Delaney and NBS, trying to align Uniclass with the varying asset hierarchies within our owner operators. We've got a digital engineering group. We've got many groups, and the owner operator one is just one of them, and we will be bouncing off each other collectively as BIM for Water. So very whistle stop. It's really about the principles at present, but yeah, I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's been very useful. We will take questions at the end of the session after we finish the next presentation. So our next session will be from Steve Patton from BIM for Health and Mark Lenton from BIM for SME. And it will be about digital and sustainability, the cradle to grave, and the golden thread. So over to you.
Okay, thank you. Just put our slides up to presentation mode, if you can best bear with us. Okay, Mark, could you switch to the next slide, please, if that's okay?
Yeah, just waiting for the, there we go.
That's great, thank you. Well, firstly, thank you.
Sorry, just to interrupt you, your slides are being shown in presenter mode with your notes rather than the main slide.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, Steve Batson here. I'm chair of BIM for Health, the Digital Estates Group, and firstly, on behalf of the group, thank you for the opportunity to present today. But before we present the main body of our talk on the digital sustainability and the golden thread, I have the easier task of just briefly a brief outline and background to the group. The group is unique in the sense that it's made up of representatives from organisations and bodies as shown on this slide, and is jointly led by IHEAM and HEFMA to support and represent the healthcare sector on the BIM process through understanding, collaboration and culture change, and on the wider digital estate NHS agendas. More information on the group obviously can be found on our website here, www.bimforhealth.org, and we welcome engagement and communication with you. Similar to the previous speaker, the BIM for Water chair of the group, we're setting up a series of subgroups, but I would like to now introduce my colleague, Mark Lenton, who represents BIM for SME on one of our groups, and we'll be sharing with you some of our thinking, and that's led by the Digital Health Research and Development subgroup on healthcare digital estates. Mark, if you're okay.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can see the slides okay. Is that fine?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, perfectly fine.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks. Yes, good morning, everybody. Just a little bit of positioning. I'm basically an electronic engineer, not really in the construction space myself. So if my terminology or language doesn't quite fit with some of the conversations which I've heard this morning, nearly all of it, so hopefully it will still make sense. So from my background, I've moved through being an engineer through into technology, working in the legal sector, but eventually ending up as what I would call an innovation consultant. So looking at how technology can be applied to some of the challenges in business today. And in fact, this is where I've come into contact with Carl Redmond. Carl is a member of NHS Digital, and he asked me if I would support the conference here today. And in fact, it's quite interesting because Carl's very, very supportive of looking at the challenges from the other end of the telescope. You know, we often see in the health sector, it gets to a point where, from an operate perspective, enough is not considered about how the hospital needs to function and the hospital outcomes and the patient outcomes that we're trying to achieve when we either adjust, refurbish, or construct a new hospital. So the new focus for certainly for the Leeds Teaching Hospital, which is what Carl's one of the program managers on, which is part of the new the UK HIP program, one of the first of the 6 big hospitals to be built under Boris's agenda. Is that really with Leeds, they want to take a different approach to the traditional way of going at things. So they're very keen to do and understand how that hospital is going to be used from an experience perspective, from a sustainability perspective, from a return on investment, safety, and obviously, most importantly, patient outcomes. So there's a whole load of work going at the moment into the strategy side of things there, and I'm going to share a little bit about that, but from the operate end of the lens rather than from the design end of the lens. So hopefully this will make sense. And I think when you consider, actually, when you look at the lifetime of the building, the operate costs really are going to be something like 80% of the construction costs. So it does make sense to put a greater degree of emphasis, I think, in that space. So looking at it from the operate end of the lens, you know, what I thought I would do is just try and share with you some of the considerations of critical components that sit in that operate end of the cycle, and how information plays a critical part in providing that whole outcome that the NHS is looking for. So hence the title there of an NHS example around a smart, data-driven, sustainable facility, operating that and making sure that the staff and the patients have a healthy and engaging experience. From a smart perspective, really we're thinking of an environment that's visually interactive and can respond to sort of automatically and react to feedback and respond to self-diagnosis. Obviously data-driven. The whole digital agenda in the NHS is now getting a lot of government drive, if you like, through things like government soft landings, through the Treasury Green Book, and sort of the whole net zero agenda, if you like, by 2050, which is being driven from government. So the new hospitals are really having to take account of those government, if you like, guidelines in terms of what they're trying to achieve. And I think from an operations perspective, you know, we have to consider those now and feed that information into the design cycle, so that basically the design is taking full account of those things. So when you look at Leeds, for instance, Leeds is going to be something like about a 90,000 square meters new hospital with a new 5,000 square meter pathology lab attached to some of the existing building in Leeds. And that means, you know, there's a whole kind of plethora of activity in defining right from the very beginning what it is that they want that hospital outcome to look like. And that's quite an undertaking, because you're peering into the future, not quite knowing what capabilities and technologies are going to be required, what repurposing, if you think of the COVID scenario, you know, how you might have to repurpose part of the hospital to deal with a particular catastrophe or a particular pandemic. So those things now are starting to come into the strategic planning of what's happening with certainly with the Leeds Hospital of the Future, as they're calling it. So if I just move on and take a slightly more detailed look in that areas. I mean, I think this is again a slide I pinched from somewhere on the internet, so apologies if anyone out there is the author, but hopefully you'll be flattered that it seems to sum up some of the key aspects of what we're looking at here. So you'll all be familiar with, I guess, the whole scenario of the process flow there, and how information has to move in the BIM world, but has to start to build and develop to enable the future operations and maintenance end of life capabilities, where the documentation from, if you like, the AIM is supplemented by lots of other external information, probably maybe not obviously from a GDR perspective, patient information about named individuals, but certainly trends around treatments and laboratories and how they're operating. to enable that hospital to be functioning as effectively as possible. So, we're very much wanted to sort of look at what sits behind the right-hand side of that picture of a digital twin, where digital twin I wouldn't say it's in its fullest sense here. It's probably some of the information that you're putting into that digital twin is going to be static, whereas I guess a true digital twin is completely live, like monitoring an airplane engine or something like that. But the key thing is around the structured and interoperable data that needs to flow on that end-to-end life cycle there to enable it to be supplemented as you get into the operate phase. So I'm just going to look behind that a little bit more and consider some of the information that might be needed. So really, if you look at the operate cycle, we're thinking about the assets that exist in a hospital, or actually in any building, and some of those key assets that are most critical to the functioning of the building. And those assets will be monitored in some way or other. That could be anything from access through to leakage, through to water purity, air quality, all those things, right down to monitoring of critical, in a hospital, for instance, the monitoring of the location of critical medical equipment. The hospital being such a large estate, sometimes they need to find those very quickly. So sensing becomes very, very important. And looking at the sensing environment, there are pretty much sensors out there for virtually any requirement that's needed. But again, in the operate cycle, if you're going to sense something, you want to be feeding this in what you're going to sense, why you're going to sense it into the design phase, because if it's not already covered, then it will need to be. So again, having a picture of what that will look like in the operate cycle, what that information is, what data you're going to need to gather is pretty critical, and that's fed in. So that in the operate end of the cycle, it could be something just as simple as one particular ward in a hospital having a dashboard, or a clinician having access to location of medical equipment via his iPhone. It could be something as simple as that that you're trying to pull together, or it could be something a little bit more complex about how it integrates all these sensors and information integrates with the asset management or CAFM system in some cases, or enterprise asset management system. But these things should not just be lots of different systems. In our view, it needs to be a joined up world. And what typically is happening in the operate cycle of the environments, you get lots and lots of different systems, and you end up with many silos that can't share information. So I think it's beholding, as we start to look at how this needs to be pieced together, we've got to look at that interoperability that was spoken about earlier, and how that information can be shared easily, and avoiding the proprietary systems that will drive you down one path and lock clients into only being able to operate one way. So it's quite important that we think about that in that sense. So really the sensors will provide information into an asset management system. The asset management system is there to sort of cycle around everything from doing scheduled maintenance, predictive maintenance, looking at inventory and the cost of that inventory, how you manage that inventory, even buying that inventory. All this needs to be joined up so that the information can flow through, and that inventory obviously starts to, what you need to hold comes from the original asset information that's done at the design and build phase. So again, that information has to be transferring down the line in an easily readable format. So that's the important side there. And obviously some of the other things in there around health and safety, looking at the classification of engineers being authorized to work on certain types of equipment, and then being able to measure different suppliers in that asset management cycle, and the key performance indicators of those suppliers. Are they having to revisit a certain asset too many times, etc.? So all that is data, and this is all generating data which needs to be used. The other, I guess, more slightly strategic end of the why all this data is gathered. There's kind of is what we generally term big data here, but it's kind of moving on to a slightly more detailed view of that. Is in the asset management space. I've kind of identified the things here on the left of what are the benefits that the NHS are looking for from an asset management system, and that should inform the type of data that we need to be collecting, and therefore what needs to be designed to generate that data at the start of the cycle. So as you can see, different things there. I'm not going to read through every one in the interest of time, but it gives you a perspective of the kind of information that needs to flow around that asset management capability. And likewise, when you look at the big data requirements, again, the benefits that the NHS are trying to seek from that information that's captured from operational sensors, but also merged and developed with external data sources in a large data lake or data environment, where they can run artificial intelligence across that information to look at patient outcomes, what's driving those patient outcomes, etc. So even with the building is not disconnected from the patient. You know, the things that actually you're sensing will be needed in order to assess those patient outcomes and look at what will make a difference. So that data environment is extremely critical. And I think, you know, Marcus early on his BIM for Water conversations was making that point very, very clearly around how the asset information management will feed through into operations activity at the tail end of the cycle. So just moving on, where does that kind of leave us when you look at managing that operate environment? What we see today, the challenge is both across the clients and the suppliers. And from a client's perspective, clearly, if you're putting a lot more effort up front around what does the operate environment need to look like, there's a cost implication of that. But I think that has to be considered. There needs to be a greater willingness and a thoroughness to get down into the detail of what those desired outcomes are. And that, you know, that may take some time when you consider the complex workings of a hospital. But it is something that I believe has to be done, so that there can be more detail in the sort of the EIRs and AIRs, and that you've got a good definition of, from an NHS perspective, what do they mean when they talk about sustainability? What do they mean when they're talking about patient experience or staff experience, or compliance or safety, etc.? They need to be broken down, and we need to be able to determine what are the measures. Once we know the measures, we then get into what is the data that we need to support those measures. So from clients' perspective, more focus, I think, more detailed upfront work. From a supplier's perspective, I think there's an onus on suppliers, especially the lead suppliers, to making sure they're looking at providing specialists in those early engagements when we're looking at concept design, etc., to consider a lot more around the smart operations of these buildings. Again, sadly, it's more detail, but it's detail that I think if the effort's put in up front, we'll always end up with a better outcome, looking at those performance targets, sustainability goals, etc. So more focus up front from both clients and suppliers. And actually, coming to the legal presentation that I saw earlier, has to be more sort of holding each other to account for those, so that the information is digitally maintained, that's captured, agreed, and then authorized, and that's maintained right through to the life cycle, so that when the maintenance engineer or when the data scientist wants to do some analysis, that information, they can pull that data together in order to drive what's required in the operations cycle. So really, I think that kind of sums up where I was with in terms of that. I don't know. I think we're into a Q&A session now, Pam. Is that right?
Yes, we are. Thank you very much, Steve and Mark, for the excellent presentation. It's been very, very informative. As I see from the questions, we still have some questions from the previous session that we will answer offline. But for this session, I think we have one question for Marcus, which is about CDEs. So just saying, apologies, I cannot find them. Okay, so the question was, how would you, what was the reality of distributed CDEs when there are so many options in the market?
Okay, so I've tried to put a response up there as well, so it's captured. I believe because the water sector is very much an operational sector, there's huge focus on the asset information model, which generally isn't just a typical CDE, so something that we'd buy off the shelf as a single package. There's often multi-millions of pounds invested in corporate systems and solutions that are not likely to disappear anytime soon. As such, there's good opportunity to investigate maybe extending those corporate systems to grant WIP and shared, and obviously then published and archived access. Alternatively, looking at how to share that information with the delivery teams, and then looking at possible integrations with the delivery team software. There's often, because of our nature, some 5-year business cycles, there's often a very good business case to develop software integrations rather than employ a team of people to collate and manually publish information. I hope that answers the question.
No, thank you. Thanks very much.
So, sorry, Hadil, there's another question that's coming a different way for Marcus. So the question is, will the BIM for Water owner operator group be sharing its CDE thinking with other infrastructure owner groups? Sorry to put you on the spot there, Marcus.
No, that's quite right. I very much hope we will be tying in with BIM for infrastructure. With everything that we do. Part of our operating model, and we still need to get it fully established. I think I mentioned we do aim to build relationships with other kind of focus groups, and yeah, one of those will be BIM for infrastructure. And this is the sort of thing we'd like to share.
Excellent, thank you.
Right, thanks very much. So, Steve, Mark, do you have any additional comments on systems or CDEs?
No, one probably more a question that I think we could put out there is, I'm looking at CDEs at the moment. There's a lot of conversations around client-side CDEs and supplier or lead supplier CDEs, and how sort of two environments potentially could exist or need to exist in some of the larger projects. I don't know too much about that space, but I'd certainly welcome anybody getting in touch and providing that kind of information. But it's certainly a lot of debate out there at the moment around client-side CDEs and supplier CDEs, from what I hear.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it's there's a business case to be made. When it comes to project mobilisation and the contractual terms and conditions. If, for example, the terms and conditions say that the delivery team should work on a client system, that may actually reduce their efficiency because the client system may not be optimised for that type of work. And again, the water industry is blessed with its minimum 5-year term contracts with the AMP cycles. So we're we're very fortunate to be able to have these conversations and to identify where benefits may be to go either way.
Yeah. One final point on that, if I may, just one final point. I think the other aspect of that, what it really boils down to in where the data resides, is around the data ownership. I think that's typically been some of the challenges that's occurred, especially in the recent Trent and McDonald issues. From what I've read, anyway, it's about being upfront, getting absolute clarity around the data ownership rules or obligations that exist. If you get that clear up front, I think you're in with a better chance. But that was something that certainly NHS are looking at.
Yeah, I would always expect like a data usage kind of agreement or data systems and data usage agreement to be in place that's mutually sound for all parties.
Thank you very much. A small comment from myself as a client, from a client side, at Coventry University Estates, we have just procured a common data environment, and we aim to use it to receive information at the handover stage initially, but we are planning processes for using it at earlier stage of project. So I will get in touch with you, Steve, to have a conversation about it. So thank you all. Thank you for raising this point, and thank you all for your contributions. Pam, I don't think we have additional questions.
No, so what we will do is we will take a break until 12:15, so 5 minutes until we start the designers and